All right, in this tutorial, I'm going to explain a couple of techniques in Illustrator that you can use for your diagram. And you should already be somewhat familiar with Illustrator from the previous tutorial, but I'll just quickly review things to make sure you're up to speed. So when you first open Illustrator, it'll look something like this. I'll click Create New, and I'm going to go to 11 by 17. So I'm going to go up here to Print, format I want, and I don't know if I can find that size here, but I'll just width will be 17 here, height will be 11, and everything else can remain. I'll click Create. Good. Okay, and I can hit Control R on my keyboard to bring up the rulers, and so you see here in top that I got my 17. So like we did in the previous examples, I'm going to use a PDF of plan that I did in Rhino that I exported from Rhino as like a background or underlay to my diagrams. So I'm just going to drag that PDF in here, and I exported mine to 11 by 17. Should kind of like fit to size pretty good there. But of course you can scale it up or down. You can always select it and right click and go to transform and go to scale and do uniform or sorry, do like 200% or 50% if you want to scale it like systematically. And once I have it placed where I want it, I'm actually going to put it on a different layer and of what I'm doing. So let me just open my layer down here. Okay, I'll make a new layer. And so yeah, to move something between layers in Illustrator, you just select that thing. In the layers panel, you should see a little colored square appear on the very right-hand side. That kind of represents your object. So it'll show you what layer it's on. And if you drag that square to whatever other layer you want it to be on, it'll put it on that layer. Now, just like in Photoshop, the order of the layers matters. So if I were to draw something now on layer 1, you can see my plan showing up as like in front of it. So I just want to make sure that I drag layer 1 to be on top. And I'm also going to lock layer 2. That way it doesn't move, doesn't diagramming. Now I thought I would show a couple of examples or a couple of techniques that were shown in the examples from past student work on this assignment. So this one's relatively simple. It's just a series of pathways that were drawn using the pen tool in Illustrator, and different stroke weights or line thicknesses were applied to those pathways. So I'll show you kind of quickly how one might do that. Use the curvature tool or the pen tool. Again, to draw a curvy line, what you do is you click and drag. Okay. And then when I'm done, I'll hit escape. Now, first of all, what you can see is it's actually covering my plan. That's not what I want. So like I explained in the past tutorial, there's a stroke and a fill in Illustrator. Every line has fill, which is it has a stroke, which is the outline. You know, how thick and what color it is. Like if I change the stroke weight here in my stroke panel, I can make the line appear thicker. And I also have a fill applied to this line, which changes the color. You can kind of see better It's just stretching it between the endpoints of my line, even though it's not a closed curve, it's still making it. And to get rid of that, all I got to do is on the swatches panel or over here on the left, click the little none button. Or sorry, you could do it in the color. Yeah, by the way, you can double click on the little tabs of the different menus to expand or track your options. And I will take that here. So it's really just a collection of lines like this. And the only thing I think that probably different is the little end caps. Apply the end caps to that. Again, I can zoom in by holding Alt and scrolling on the keyboard. You can also use the zoom. I can pan by holding space and clicking and dragging. So I can apply a different color to this. One from my swatches here. Oops, sorry, I have to make sure that stroke is current. Right. And I could draw another line. Right, I guess I used the curvature tool. I'm not 100% not as familiar with that tool. And so then I could draw a second line that shows branching thing. And so I have a little bit of overlap there. Now you can see that in the example, there's a range of different line thicknesses that are used. And there's different colors and they're layered on top of and behind each other. Now, if I, by the way, if you ever hit tab by accident in Illustrator, it'll show or hide your menu. True in some Adobe software. There. Now, if I wanted to make this line appear that it wasn't kind of like overlapping with the inside edge of this other line, I can always edit the control points, right? So I'll go to the direct select tool rather than the selection tool. I'll click on the line, accidentally anchor point there. I'll click on the line to show where the anchor points are, those little white squares. Click on this one, and then I can move it around. I can also move the handle, grips to change the curvature. So there we go. Now it's sticking out. And I guess you might also scale it down a little bit to get that kind of hierarchy. Now, if we wanted to have another set of lines that showed like the path of a different user group or something like that. Okay. So I'll make this a different. And it doesn't look quite as smooth as it could, so again, grab my direct select tool. Okay. And so if you wanted to rearrange, for example, this line behind that line, all you would have to do is use the arrange functions in Illustrator. So all these lines are on the same layer because I'm on one layer. That's fine. But in order to put this one in front of in order to put the blue in front of the red line, I would just select it, right click, go to arrange, and go to bring to front. That's kind of how you do pathways, different thicknesses and things. You could also make it a dash line. Again, if we go to the stroke panel, we could check that little box dash line. And we can scale up or down the dashes and we can add another spacing independent of the dashed space. where it says gap, so we could change the space between the dashes. Dashes, make it kind of a dotted thing. Then you do that just by kind of making the dash roughly the same. Or you just zero apparently. So that's how you would edit the dashes to get different effects. Um, and I also wanted to point out, of course, there's the swatches panel over here on the right, and that should come with a bunch of default colors. But there's also a panel. If we go to Window and go to Color Guide, and this is kind of like a library of colors. So up at the top, we can go from a whole range of different kind of groups of colors that are, yeah, so it shows how they're analogous or something like that. So each time we select a different color over there, it should show us, kind of color families based on that color. And the same is true if we just choose a color in the color swatch um, editor with the eyedropper. So again, we can do, analogous, which will give us kind of shades of a similar color. We can complementary colors, which is like opposites, or we can do, yeah, all kinds of different color families based on an original color that, sort of go together one way or another. Okay, so that's one way to use Adobe to help you kind of select colors that work together, right? Now, I want to show a couple other things. So in here, for example, there was kind of a gradient that was created by a series of overlapping transparent blobs. Again, that's something that you could do just by tracing the outlines of different shapes. All this stuff. And I think the best way to do this is actually to use a tool called the Blob brush tool. So another way to draw curves, by the way, is to use a paintbrush tool. And if you have that on stroke, you can drag, kind of draw stuff with the mouse. I don't know if it's that easy to close it again, but like Illustrator will just kind of stretch fill between the endpoints, so it looks more or less like a blob shape. So that's one way to do it. And another way would be to use another tool called the Blob brush tool. Set the color to only your fill, and you can increase the sizes brush using the brackets, the square brackets on the keyboard. And so that will allow you to kind of color in area. Create a shape that way. So now when I select that guy, it's just a fill. It's just like a solid shape. And you can see we can still edit the outlines of it. Drag select tool, and it creates anchor points based on what we did with our brush tool there. But so let's show like an example, a couple of these. Edges. Okay, and so because I drew it second, it actually joined the original shape. Or if there, different. Okay, so it doesn't join them if you do a different color. Okay, so then you could kind of layer them. You could do different colors. So now I have two that are overlapping like that, right? So all you would do is you just select each one, the opacity. That way you can see them through each other. And of course, where they stack, they'll make darker color. And you could also adjust the color guide, adjust it to be like a gradient kind of good like gradient one. Kind of fade from one color to another. So that's one way to do those shapes. Of course, you could also just draw the outline pen tool, similar result. And you could also like, if you don't get results that are just what you want, also just edit the after the fact, losing some control there by but anyway, so you could kind of smooth it out after the fact if you and let's see. So that kind of covers how this is done. You can see it's like you can see it's like it's not that clean, it's not that perfect or pristine, but there's weird sharp points and stuff like that, but it's the effect when you kind of zoom back out is still very, very, visually clear and stuff like that. So, all right. And lastly, I'll show kind of how to do some of this. Again, similar techniques. So we can also draw with shapes, of course. Draw rectangles. We can apply colors to the outlines or to the fills of them. We can change the stroke weight. And we can also make different kinds of shapes. And this one will actually allow you to adjust the amount of roundedness of the corner. Go for drawing certain kinds of shapes and circles and ellipses. And you could use that to draw like little dots, kind of like what you see in the example. And then again, most everything else was, so I already used the brush tool. I would switch over to my stroke there. And I could draw one of these lines, like one of these meandering pathways. But you might, or gosh, wow, it made like a denim seam. I think this is, oh yeah, up at the top here we can apply different patterns. So I guess this is like a default one, but we could just go back to basic there, right? And change the weight of it. And we could also apply dash line if we wanted to. So that's another way to draw those curved pathways. See here. Oh yeah, show you how to do that. So he's got these little like star shapes. I mean, you can draw shapes like that, I think. And yeah, there's a little star tool. I wonder if there's even a way. Well, anyway, there's a little star tool. So it's just like any other shape. You can apply a fill to it or a stroke to it. That's how you made those. There's also symbols that come like preloaded by default. We go to Window. You just drag them, I guess. Yeah, there's like the default book thing. So there's a bunch of symbols, and you can get to different ones. The little 3 lines button in the top right. Go to symbol library, and there's like loads of different ones. So you could use that to kind of like make some notes or some tags or what all they are. That to make, like flow chart. Anyway, so they're just kind of like little illustrations that are pre-made. Lots of them where that exists. And the other thing I should show is just to review with the text. Like if you wanted to make, I mean, I think you could do a lot of the stuff in InDesign. So when I'm done with this, I can save it as an Illustrator file, and I can export it as a PDF and place it in InDesign. You can also place the Illustrator file directly into InDesign. And that's probably the best way to do it, because that'll keep it linked to the original Illustrator file. So if you go back and edit the Illustrator file, it'll also update the InDesign file. That would be my recommended method. But so I would do most of the text and like page numbers and everything. You do that, best to do that in InDesign. But for example, if I wanted to make a key here, that's something like that graphic, for example, is best to do. Illustrator, right? So just to explain like how to do text again, and we could box. One wants color. So the text tool, there's 2 ways to use this. Click and drag. Should automatically fill it with placeholder text, and you can say brightest. You can also click without dragging. Just click once in a single spot. And that will make it so that you don't really have like a bounding box to your text. So for example, when I scale this too small, it like disappears the text. Whereas this will just change and distort scale. So those are based on how you click, it'll change kind of what the properties are. It just scales with the size of the text. Yeah, that's how you do that. Graphic. So hold Alt on the keyboard to copy something. I would just like reposition. That one's in front of the other medium blob, so I would form, arrange back, send it back. Here. Okay. Important thing. But anyway, all right. And then I would just, you could draw a line, dash line, circle at the, you just kind of put things together. And you hold shift to select multiple objects. And I'm holding shift to move it straight, like ortho mode, and I'm holding alt. Shift to deselect. Anyway, so that's kind of how you would make a legend or a key. And you should have access to all the same fonts, that you would use in make. You know, or best case scenario is to stick to what you're going to use in InDesign. Anyway, so that kind of wraps up this tutorial. That should kind of give you a sense of how to do some of the things that you'll see in this example. And yeah, we'll cover perspective in another video. All right, go ahead and end it there.